Well, good evening. It is Thursday, February 25th, 2021. Time is 6:30 p.m. and I would like to welcome everybody to a regular meeting of the Independent School District 191 Burnsville Egan Savage School Board meeting. Thank you. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Director Hume, would you please lead us in that?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The first item of business is to approve tonight's agenda. I would ask for a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
And a second, please.
Second.
Was that Director Connor?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Ms. Kenny, will you please call the roll?
Sorry about that. Alt,
Aye.
Chester,
Aye.
Connor,
Aye.
Hume,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Saeed,
Aye.
Werb.
Aye.
Very good. The motion was moved by Director Hume, seconded by Director Connor, and passed unanimously. Now we will move to the information section of tonight's meeting and begin with a report about the American Indian Education Programming. Speakers will be Mina Afadal, Director of Curriculum, Instruction and Assessment, Rebecca Musso, American Indian Education Liaison, and Kelly Sundquist, Chair of the American Indian Parent Advisory. Mina, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Miller. My name is Stephanie White, Director of Student Support Services, and I'm stepping in for my colleague, Amina Aftadal, this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce the informational presentation on the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee. Tonight, we will have two presenters, and so I'll ask them to come forward. Rebecca Musso, and she is new to our district, and so I'm so pleased that she's here tonight to share with us the work that she's been doing on behalf of our students and families, and to show the vision for the committee. And secondly, I'd like to welcome Kelly Sundquist. She is the chairman of our parent advisory, and Kelly has been with the committee for several years and is just a rock star parent. And will be also joining in the presentation. And so with that, I will hand it over to Rebecca. And Aaron, I believe we're relying on you for the slides. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm sorry, I'm just pulling out my notes. So I'm going to introduce myself in my native language, and then I'll allow my parent advisory committee chairperson to introduce herself, and then I'll continue on with the presentation. Good evening. Haumitakyapi, chante washte nape chiuzapi. Dakota chaje, ishtaziziwia, washichu chaje, Rebecca Musso. Miniwaka oyanke hemataha, minishota edwati. Good evening, everyone. I shake everybody's hands, fist bumps. My Indian name is Yellow Eyes Woman. I am Dakota. I am from the Spirit Lake Nation. I'm a tribally, federally recognized enrolled member of the Spirit Lake Nation in North Dakota and currently living, obviously, in Minnesota. I will let Kelly introduce herself.
Anin Buju. Hello, my name is Kelly Sundquist, Otter Creek Anishinaabe, White Earth Nation, and I am chairperson of the American Indian Parent Advisory Committee, Miigwech. Thank you.
So before I get to the slides, I would like to do a quick land acknowledgement. So we are gathered here respectively on the unceded land of the Sisseton, Wahpeton, Midewakanton, Tintuinta, Dakota Oyate peoples of Minnesota. I believe that my tribal nation of Spirit Lake is a sister nation to all of those tribes. And I just ask that you join me in taking a moment to acknowledge those communities, their elders, both past and present, and future generations. That's why we're all here as educators for those future generations. And just acknowledging the past of those the things that have happened of those Indigenous peoples that continue to live here and our neighbors. Thank you for that. So just jumping into it to the first slide. I'm sorry, I lost it on my computer here. Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. So what we're going to review on is just the program purpose and goals, the role of the Parent Advisory Committee, activities and outreach that we're going to be doing for this school year, or that we are doing, our funding sources and future plans. Next slide, please. So the Indian Education Program purpose and goals is to support the academic achievement of the Indigenous students that are in the Burnsville-Egan Savage School District. And by Indigenous, I just want to point out that I mean American Indian and Alaska Native students. That is how they're marked in enrollment. Also supporting their post-secondary preparation, ensuring relevant curriculum within the district, relevant to the needs and interests and cultural heritage of those students, provide positive reinforcement, intercultural awareness among staff, and supplement state and federal educational and co-curricular programs. What that means is that our goals are to increase completion and graduation rates of Indigenous students, emphasizing academic achievement, retention, and attendance, development of supportive services for staff, including in-service training and technical assistance, research projects, including innovative teaching approaches, which actually has recently been brought up to me, which is great. Just teachers wanting to reach out, or kind of not reach out, but expand their teaching approaches, and including Indigenous thought, which is awesome. Career counseling for Indigenous students, modification of curriculum, as I mentioned, ensuring that the curriculum is appropriate to the cultural heritage. And then supplemental instruction for language, literature, history, and culture. Next slide, please. So the Parent Advisory Committee is critical, obviously, to the achievement and success of American Indian students. It is obviously composed of parents of the Indigenous students that are eligible to be enrolled in American Indian education programs. What that means is enrolled in a federally or state recognized or are a linear descent. The Parent Advisory Committee serves an advisory role, like it says in the name, to help ensure that students are receiving those culturally relevant and equitable educational opportunities, and offers a valuable opportunity to strengthen community partnerships. And it really has. I believe that we have a really good set of parents that I have been able to meet with so far. Next slide, please. Also on the Parent Advisory Committee, they come from many different nations. Like Kelly said, she is from White Earth, and we have Lakota people from Standing Rock, South Dakota, I think there's one from East Coast area. And so there's just many different tribal peoples represented on the parent committee, which is awesome. Next slide. So when I first started, I've only been with the Indian education program in the district for about 3 months, a few months now. And so when I started, then the big project was getting the education benefits applications done. And so that allowed me time to meet parents, kind of do one-on-one time with them and ensure that they get those applications done, obviously. The next big project that came up was right before Christmas, and which was another outreach event that helped kind of put some faces and names together with students. And it was a Toys and Tacos event, very successful. I believe we had about, I want to say 60 to 70 parents show up, families, I should say, like students and families that came through. Through years of networking, I had a family friend of ours that works for the Toys for Tots Foundation, and donated toys, and we ordered Indian tacos from the Powell Grounds in Minneapolis, and did like a curbside pickup meal day for them. And so that was really awesome. And I also recruited a few new students also in like the early ages. So that was awesome. In March coming up, we're going to be doing a picture installation at the high school. I'm actually really excited for this. I invite you, the board, to attend. We don't have a set date yet, I believe. And so whenever that date comes out, I'll make sure to that all of you get an invitation to that. Like I said, it's at the high school, and a picture was donated that was done by an Indigenous artist from Minnesota. And I still have yet to see that picture too. So I'm just excited for all of that, for all of us to get together and have this happen. The next thing is the McGeezy partnership, the McGeezy Communications in Minneapolis. They have been partnering or attending our South of the River meetings. And so we have entered into a partnership or a collaboration, a formal agreement with them to help provide tutoring services, because that's been kind of #1 request from parents in this time of online virtual learning. And so any way we can help figure out, get those students what they need, it's been good so far. And then some other more student focused things is beginning a student leadership group, where I would like to focus on identity with the high schoolers, And then in the middle school and areas, 2 high schoolers work on cultural teachings, rites of passage, and coming of age types of cultural identity. And I don't believe that was something that can be established this year yet. Hopefully within the next year, we can have some of those types of things set up and established, and doing some kind of bigger activities with the high schoolers and helping them understand who they are. I believe one thing that I've encountered is a lot of identity and not really understanding themselves as an Indigenous person living in an urban area. Next slide, please. Is that it? Next slide. Oh. So I believe this graph is pretty self-explanatory. 126, 150 is our total for the program. The majority of that comes from achievement and integration, 7% from the federal Title VI grant, and then also 34% from the State Indian Education Program.
Great. And I just want to jump in and just reinforce that the American Indian Education Program is being funded outside of district funds, and that it is a great opportunity for us to include that as part of our cultural outreach and part of our equity plans.
Thank you, Amina. So future plans. One thing that has come up that we're looking into getting going this year soon is book readings, storytelling. The Shakopee community and a person that works for the community that's on our parent committee has recommended an Indigenous author from South Dakota and who's recently written a children's book and is doing live readings, virtual live readings. And so we're thinking we're kind of do a family night style virtual live reading of this book, and we're going to order this book. And so we're trying to get the ball rolling on that. Storytelling, so I'm doing outreach on the lookout for Minnesota Native elders or just storytellers in general, people that are language storytellers. I also hope to resume the drum and dance program. Obviously with COVID, we can't really do things in person just yet. So hopefully we can get that going again. I know that a lot of the community, especially a lot of the outside of the school district, really anticipated that. Just having, a chance to come together. I know that personally, those types of gatherings can be really refreshing for people. And so even if you're not Indigenous, I know that it is, just to, get together and talk about things other than outside of ourselves through drum and dance. And also it's educational, teaching kids how to dance jingle or whatever cultural dance is relevant to them. As I mentioned before, I am having meetings with the South of the River collaborative group. We are really just waiting it out to see what COVID is going to allow as far as the powwow goes. Obviously 191 is the host venue for the powwow. And so I might be coming to you in the near future, seeing what we can and can't do as far as hosting something like that. But I'm going to leave that up to my parent committee because they might want to just do something virtual and not have an in-person celebration. But that's obviously going to come from the parent committee. I had meant we are anticipating Indigenous presenters surrounding Native American Heritage Month, which is in November. Also, Rock Your Mocks is in November. I believe it's November 15th. A conversation or something that has just kind of been brought to my attention is Sioux Trail. And so that's why on the slide, it's on number 5, it says building name change. I have to do a little bit more research and digging on that part. And so, but I know that it is something that has been kind of brought to my attention. And I hope that land acknowledgements can start happening. Some of the other administration people in the high school building have also brought to my attention doing a set land acknowledgement inside the building with maps or just having some sort of statement installation about the land that the buildings are on. And so that's just something to bring to your attention also, and things that I have on my mind as the cultural liaison. I will open it up to questions or comments. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentation. Here. Board members, do we have anybody who would like to make any comments or ask any questions this time? Indicate by raising your hand in the Zoom session, please. Director Alt, have your hand raised.
Well, first, thank you very much for this report, Rebecca. I always appreciate receiving this before the vote of concurrence, because I know that, you know, a few years back, we did have a vote of non-concurrence, and we do appreciate that the district is doing better with our Indigenous families, so that they feel confident in giving us that vote of concurrence. I think what really speaks to me in this report is, you know, obviously it's so important to celebrate the identity of our Indigenous families and students, and to really lift that heritage up. And that's really the primary purpose is for our students and our families. Secondary to that, I think there's benefit to all of our students to understand the history that many may have already been aware of, but others have not been aware of. And I think really understanding, you know, doing what we can with our curriculum and the celebrations to make sure that we're all learning together. But again, that's, you know, the primary focus is our Indigenous families. So appreciate having you here. So happy to have you here. I did just have one question. The building name change, was that coming out of the advisory committee, the suggestion?
No, it was with a staff member that had just kind of brought it to my attention that was something that had come up before the building had closed. It's my understanding the building is closed now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's a child care center at this point.
Okay.
For the district.
Yeah. And so it's something that Kelly and I have talked about, but we anticipate just having just a discussion initially about it at our next parent meeting.
Thank you.
That's where we're at with that now. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other board members wish to speak? All right, well, I would just like to echo the thanks for taking the time in your evening to come here and present. Appreciate the time you spent and appreciate the informative discussion. We look forward to working more with all of you, and especially those of you in the new in this role. Thank you. Right, we will next move in our information, staying in our information section. We're going to move to a report about the fiscal year 2022 initial budget adjustments. Presenting will be Dr. Battle, Superintendent, and Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services. Dr. Battle, are you going to take it out?
Yes, thank you, Chair Miller. Thank you, Board of Directors. And I too want to thank Kelly Sundquist and Rebecca Musso for your presentation. So tonight, Lisa Ryder and I will share updated fiscal year 22 budget development information. So this is what we're going to go through tonight. So I will ask Aaron to pull up the presentation, please. And we're going to start talking about where we are right now and how we got there, our starting point for next year's budget. We'll look at the current reality and identify the issue we need to address for fiscal year 22 budget. We'll also review the strategies for building this budget based on the board guidance from the February 11th workshop as a part of our initial proposal. And then we'll review what's next, both short-term and long-term. In the next slide, you will see a couple of familiar document names, Guiding Change, and the fiscal year budget goals process and timeline. I'm not going to go through them tonight, but here are two of the documents that we have reviewed in the past that guide our work. The Guiding Change outlines in more detail our current situation, the outcomes we hope to achieve in building this budget, and the things that are not acceptable for us to do. Next slide, please. Just to simplify what's in the Guiding Change document, we will continue what we started last year, taking a priorities and values-based approach to the budget. That means we'll be strategic in our approach. We'll fund our priorities first. And some of you may have been familiar with another option for developing a budget when you have to make any reductions, and that is to just cut a certain percentage across the board in all of our areas. However, a priorities-based approach really looks at our strategic plan and how the board has prioritized what we value in this district. And as you are all well aware, we are implementing this process in the context of a pandemic. And so you'll see as we go through the outcome we want, which is really focused on providing stability for our students, minimizing loss of service, support and programming, which is so essential this year more than ever before. And so with that, with the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of our Business Services.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. So Dr. Battle spoke of the big picture items, and we're going to start now talking about the approach of projecting our budget and building our budget for next year. I'm going to get into some of the specifics that let us start planning. So for the budget, that means going through some of the assumptions that we're making about revenue and spending for fiscal year 22. The major assumptions are around revenue, of course. Most of that is based upon our enrollment. So we have to project how many students we expect to have next year. We're starting with the assumption that the state aid will remain flat per pupil. That will be receiving some additional federal funding as the pandemic relief money is available to us. We also are assuming that there will be a less compensatory funding. The compensatory funding is based on the number of students that we had enrolled in this past fall and those that were eligible for free or reduced price meals. As a reminder, not only us, but many of the school districts around have had fewer families apply for those benefits due to the circumstances of either being in virtual academies or just not taking advantage of that this past fall. Next slide, please. On the spending side, we've built in assumptions about salaries and benefits. Of course, the vast majority of our spending is on people. And we make some assumptions about the cost of different services, including transportation and utilities. Some of these we know what to expect very closely because we have contracts that are in place, or we have a specific plan like our long-term facilities maintenance projects, or we have control over them, as is the case for supplies and materials. Next slide, please. The last set of assumptions that we're building in to our starting point for looking at next year's budget are assumptions about what we're going to not need to spend this year. As you know, the board approved a revised budget recently. These items that you see on this slide are additional reductions in spending during the current fiscal year that I do anticipate that we could, in the future, adjust our budget. So because we don't expect to have to move the BEST program this year, you see that that's listed here as a spending savings, that we would not be utilizing the $400,000 that is currently in the budget for that moving and retrofit of BEST. Because of the time that we've spent in distance learning and for other reasons, we're also expecting that we're spending less on substitutes than what we had originally budgeted. Because of the time that we've also spent in distance learning, we find that there are other areas of our budget that are lesser in spending than what we had planned on budgeting. An example of that might be our travel expense, or you can also take a look at our supply budgets and find that typically when we're in person and everyone is looking for paper or various different supplies and things of that nature, those purchases are being made. And when we're distance learning, they're not as readily made. And so those savings are existing for the current year and identified here as potential savings for the school year. This all adds up to $1.5 million in reduction of spending. And this will then result in a larger fund balance as we begin the next school year, which is fiscal year 22. But instead of being surprised by this information at the time of the audit, or just seeing those numbers at that point in time, you would consider a revision or an amendment to our current revised budget that could allow us then to show that reduced expenditures and a higher fund balance projected that would then start our fiscal year 22 budget off with that higher number. We'll know better what assets we have to work with as we get a little further down and have gone through our process of working with our ESSER funds and really kind of seeing what's needed as we bring our students back in person here, both at the elementary level as we have, and as we begin to consider that for our hybrid in our secondary schools. Next slide, please. All of these assumptions, the revenue, the expenditures, and the potential savings we may still continue to have this year, those all come to as a part of our starting point. And before we begin considering those, you see that in January, we prepared for you a comparative summary of our general fund budget and what we considered our current reality at that time. That shows an ending fund balance of $19.79 million at the end of this current year. As you look at the next slide, please, the number you see at the top for our initial projected fund balance for FY22 is now different. The difference between what you just saw on the previous slide and this number is 1.5 million. The savings that we just spoke about that could potentially happen yet this year. So assuming that amendment to the current revised budget is made, you would then see an initial projected fund balance that would be higher as a starting point as we begin to talk about then FY22. So now I'd like to kind of note that the fund balance that you do see listed here, that is the total fund balance. So that includes not just our committed and our restricted fund balances, but also then our unassigned. We typically focus on the unassigned fund balance, and the unassigned fund balance is much lower than the numbers you see here. The reason why we focus on that is because it is the unassigned fund balance that is truly what is our cash flow that we have to work with. And that is what the policy that the board has is built around, is the unassigned fund balance. What I really want to point out about this slide is what you might call the problem that we need to address. You can see that with all of the assumptions in place, we expect about $122 million in revenues and $133 million in expenditures. That leaves us with a deficit of about 10.86 million. And as we go into the next section of this presentation, that deficit is what we will be addressing with our budget strategies. You'll see that number come up again later. So let's go to the next slide, please. At this point, there's the opportunity for us to take a look at the interactive model. And so I will attempt to share the screen that I have. And so you should now be seeing a screen with some pink and yellow on it, along with numbers, right? Okay. So this is the current slide then that is reflective of that. You remember that 10.86 million? Okay, so this is our starting point. This is where we are beginning prior to us using these strategies. It does include the adjustment that we discussed about our current year adjustments here, with $1.5 million being identified as potential additional savings in the current year. It does not, however, reflect any of the other budget strategies that we will begin to talk about. So I wanted to give you kind of a before picture of what that looks like. And so as you can see, here's that beginning part of 21.29 mil, our revenues, our expenditures, the net difference, and the anticipated projected fund balance, then total fund balance, including all of these, that would be for projection of next year. And you can see that that is only at a 2.5% unassigned fund balance. Okay, that's well below that which is the board's policy. So I'm gonna, let's go back to the slides now. And there we go. And as we start on the, the next slide, with this as our starting point then, let's get into our initial proposal. As you've heard Dr. Battle share at the beginning, our strategies for building the budget revolve around the goal of protecting our programming, our staffing, and services, so that we can provide the stability to our students. Our strategies for doing that, while also maintaining a 6% unassigned fund balance goal of the board, is prioritizing the investments that we're making in our pre-K-12 pathways model, including programming and services. We want to also maximize our use of our federal pandemic relief funds, our restricted fund balances, and also our unassigned fund balance. Basically making the greatest possible use of the funds that we have that are available to us. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Battle now to talk a little bit more in depth about the first strategy.
Yes, so I'd like to spend a few minutes discussing the priority investments in our Pathways Pre-K-12. This basically affirms our priority is to continue down the path we've created when it comes to instruction, program, and services for our students. And so when we talk about building, providing stability for our students as we move through and come out of this pandemic, this is what we are talking about. So we want to continue the pathways model so that our students can have a articulated alignment pre-K all the way to graduation. So we're going to continue to invest in our early learning at specifically having a voluntary pre-K at each elementary. Just want to remind everyone that that is contingent on legislative action. And we have submitted our application, which was due in February, early February. We will continue to focus on meeting the personalized needs of our students. We want to maintain class sizes, and we will continue to pursue our equity work toward becoming a culturally proficient school system. And we absolutely want to continue and support in the mental health areas for our students and their overall wellness. And with that, I'll turn it back to Lisa Ryder.
So as we talk about our pandemic relief funds, this is an area where we want to be sure to maximize the use of these funds. There are additional costs that we know we're experiencing with regard to our transportation and operations, particularly as we have fewer students on our buses due to the need to social distance and to be safer with regard to the number of individuals in one small space. So as you take a look at our options for maximizing these federal dollars, we have, to the extent possible, the use of our CARES 1 funds in FY21. So as you may recall, we've had a lot of different acronyms that have been thrown out around the pandemic relief funds. And so CARES 1 and CARES 2 is what kind of is now in play. The coronavirus relief funds, the CRF funds, those were all kind of done and over with at the end of December. Okay, they do impact our budget, but they are no longer available to us anymore. We've used them. So what we have yet to work with are our CARES 1 funds that are available to us through this year. They can be used into the next year, and if necessary, even into up through September of 22. Now, our CARES 2 funds are yet to come to us in official format because that has to be approved by legislative action. And so as that does become available to us, the thought is that that would be around mid-March, that we would learn all of the information that we would need in order to be able to receive the funds and then budget for them and explain how we would plan to use them. The CARES 2 funds are very similar in nature to the CARES 1 funds as to how they may be used, and they will be available to us all the way through September of 2023. So here again, it's a matter of what is necessary for us to use within the current fiscal year and what is necessary to use in next fiscal year and as needed beyond. Let's go to the next slide, please. So next, as part of our proposal, the board would be taking some procedural actions that will help to protect our unassigned fund balance. So this involves following our current fund balance policy 714 and committing and assigning some of our federal and state aid that we receive this year to address the student needs in the future. We know the effects of the pandemic are not going to go away when the calendar switches to July 1. It makes sense to continue to use these funds to address those needs next year. So procedurally, if the board accepts and moves forward with what we're proposing, we'd like to take action, the board would take action to commit and to assign funds in June before officially adopting the new budget. What would happen there is the board would make a decision as to what would be committed and assigned, and that calculation would be identified, and it would be conducted as we finish the audit for the current fiscal year. But you would take action on this prior to adopting next year's budget in June. You take the action every year to commit funds. What we haven't utilized in the past is the assignment of funds. Taking these steps do allow us to protect the unassigned fund balance without sacrificing our instructional and service priorities for our students. Next slide, please. So here's what that looks like. When you think back to our starting point, that 10.86 million, I had said that the challenge that we need to address is that projected deficit for next year, 10.86 million. When we right size for our enrollment, we reduce our spending by $1 million. We then can cover the 5.96 million of the deficit with the fund balances that the board has committed and assigned. So you're essentially planning to use and planning to spend down that fund balance next year to the tune of 5.96 million. The number of 5.96 looks a little different than the number you see at the bottom of the slide of 4.46, because that's what we talked about as far as being additional needs for reductions. The difference between that is that 1.5 million. The 1.5 we talked about for the savings for the current year. So that's why it's a little different. So as we take a look then at the use of the federal resources, that 3.9 million, this is the anticipation that we would utilize a net amount of $3.9 million of our federal funds would be used for existing needs that we have, not new items necessary, but existing needs. For example, if an extra bus is needed in order to accommodate students because of the pandemic, that's an added cost. But then the amount of dollars that we would be using not for added costs, but for our existing needs, that is the 3.9 million. Does that make sense? So we would utilize more federal funds than the 3.9, but the portion that is for the use of our current needs is 3.9. And the other amount of dollars would be anticipated for added needed costs, added masks or cleaning supplies, things that are above and beyond what is typical. So as I mentioned again, that difference between that 4.46 and the 5.96 that you see there for fund balances is that 1.5 million for the current year spending that is expected this year and would be reflected in an amended revised budget moving forward then with a higher beginning balance for the next year. So as we now go to the next slide, I'm going to again share my screen, which will allow for us then to take a look at that interactive model. But this time we're going to take a look at it from with these proposed strategies in play. So you can see the impact there and what that then looks like. So you should be seeing a slide now that is, again, those numbers with pink and yellow. But in the pink, there are now, this cell, for example, has a 5.4 million, right? Yes, okay. So as you take a look at this then, let's just back up for a moment and walk this through. So as we said, in the current year, you're going to see the 1.5 million right here. And that's what we're anticipating would increase our fund balance at the end of this year. And we would plan and project for that in an amended revised budget for the current year. And we would start our budget plan for the next year then with that number. The $1 million of savings for right sizing you see here in the adjustment for right size of staff. And the use of fund balance that you're seeing is reflected in this area right here of that 5.968 million. And so this is where you can see you're spending more than what you're bringing in for revenue. It results in a net variance that then is where you are planning to spend down that fund balance. The use of the federal funds we have separated so you can see it more clearly in the pink area. So for example, we would potentially use $5.4 million, of which we would increase expenditures by 1.5 million with the intention then of the difference, that 3.9 would be utilized to address our existing expenditures that are included in this line item. Okay. So hopefully that kind of helps to see how it's all laid out and what that impact is. So that committed and assigned fund balance then shows up in the current year's ending numbers. And these are not the numbers that you see when we revise the budget that were used or assumed. With the commitment and the assignment being utilized by our board in the strategies, that would allow for these funds to be set aside here for purposes of moving forward, and then essentially you're using those funds right there. Okay, so whatever you can commit and set aside for the dollars there, then is essentially used to cover those costs here. So then in the coming year, you would project that that would then be used up because fund balance is only a one-time available use, right? With these numbers in play, as we've described, what this allows is for an expected unassigned fund balance, that line here, that calculates out just above 6%. So I'm going to now switch back over to the slideshow and stop sharing. So let's talk about our next steps. So with everything having been said thus far, let's review that process. Our general timeline, tonight we present the initial proposal. We will look for guidance from the board and we're continuing to receive input from our staff and our public. The goal is to present a recommended budget at the March 11th meeting that reflects that input and board direction. The board officially adopts the budget in June. And as I mentioned during the presentation, there are a couple of procedural actions that will take place prior to that proposal being approved. We would need to approve an amended revised budget to reflect that savings that we discussed of $1.5 million in expected spending reductions for the current fiscal year. And that can happen later this spring. It can happen in May or possibly even April. We would need to approve also an exemption, and this is typically done by the board, that by approving the adopted budget, if we're projecting the fund balance to be less than 8%, you're essentially waiving that fund balance policy that is currently set to be at 8%. That fund balance policy is policy number 714. And we would need the board to officially commit and assign those funds for use in the fiscal year 22. So that's actually an action item separate from the approval of the budget that the board does take, and it's usually right before the approval of the budget. Both of those can happen in that meeting in June as you are adopting the next year's budget. Next slide, please. We are still taking input from staff and families, and as we have said previously, we're asking about their priorities and their ideas about efficiencies. And as of February 22nd, we have received 8 responses. There's not enough responses with that actually to make any statistical claims, but anecdotally, we know that they reflect support for the district's pathway model and the student support services. And with that, I will turn this back over to Dr. Battle for the next slide.
Thank you. So lastly, I'd like to share our next steps for a systemic review of our budget. And so the pandemic has really made us look at what we do with a new perspective, and we feel strongly that this is an opportunity to go deeper and to evaluate what we're doing, how we evaluate our services, how we structure our programming, and see how we can do better. And so over the next 6 to 8 months, we'll be reviewing those systems and comparing to our peers to look for where we can be more efficient. The examples shown here are just that, examples. I don't know what we might change, but we need to be comprehensive and thorough. Everything should be on the table if we want to do what is best for our students. And with that, that's the last slide. I'd like to thank you for your time, and we're open for questions, Chair Miller and directors.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Battle and Lisa Ryder for that presentation. I will open it up again, directors, board members, if you wish to ask questions, clarify something, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. Director Hume has his hand raised. Go ahead.
More of a comment, but I think this is encouraging. It's not necessarily what I was expecting a month or 2 months ago when I was starting to think about what this year's budget process would look like. I think given the state of the world right now, I think if there was ever a year for us to use procedural votes, or however Lisa phrased it, procedural processes, in order to save the district some pain, I'm supportive of continuing that conversation. I think this is a good year to do that. There's been so much that all of our families and staff have already had to go through. To cut even more to the bone, I think would be challenging this year. So I'm encouraged by this. I look forward to continuing the discussion. I did have one question, I guess. I think I know the answer, but I'm just going to throw it out there. When you refer to right sizing for enrollment, I assume that largely means teachers, but what my question is, are there other possible reductions that could come about as a result of right sizing for enrollment? Or
That
maybe
number,
it's too early to say, but
right. So as we begin the process of actually identifying class sizes at various sites and schools and grade levels, that's where you begin to better understand exactly whether that dollar amount is going to be reflected of teachers or potentially EAs or other support services that we may have in play at a particular site. So as we take a look at this point, it's not definitive as to exactly which area of employees that we might be talking about. That will come through as we begin our work here in March and April. However, at this point in time, we come up with that figure utilizing some assumptions with regard to what is the average cost and taking a look at the change in enrollment and what does that change in enrollment then typically require with regard to staffing or result in, I guess I should say, with regard to staffing calculations. Our ratios for class sizes are not shifting. That's staying static with this proposal. What changes is the other factors, the total count of enrollment, and then therefore the count that's necessary for staffing.
and if memory serves, we made an adjustment to class size ratios last year as part of the budget process.
Correct.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Director Connor, put your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, and that brought up another question, him talking about the ratio of class sizes. What is that now currently?
The ratio is at varying levels for each grade. Let me just pull this up quick.
Oh, well, you know what? I probably can look that up then, because if it's, you know, I thought maybe it went by, you know, elementary, junior high, and high school.
It
Right.
does. We'll
It
give
does.
those ratios.
Okay.
Yep. So the elementary ratio for building this year's budget is 25.5, and that's what we will continue to use at the elementary level. Our middle level is at 36, and our senior high level is at 39.
Whoa.
Those are the factors used when calculating the staffing ratios. It's
Okay.
not necessarily what every class is, it's just that's the averages used.
Okay, thank you. And my other question was, were there any cost savings for building maintenance this year? Because, you know, since we had so little of it because students weren't in school.
Right. Yes, I think that we will see some of those savings come through, and that's where that 1.5 million is an estimate at this point in time. And as we amend the revised budget, that we would try to get that a little tighter and closer to figuring exactly how much savings there may be. We have seen savings in the areas of utilities. There are also some things, though, that when we didn't have students in school that we were working on for repairs and maintenance, for example, that we might otherwise have done in the summer. But because students were not in the buildings, we took advantage of that and got some of that work done too.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, and before we move on, I'd just like to make a quick comment on classroom size, because I know this is a discussion that will come up more, and we have probably folks listening into it. Just to be clear, the number that was given is a representative average, and you will see various classroom sizes throughout the district, but the majority of the classrooms hover somewhere in that vicinity. Director Alt, you have your hand raised.
So just a couple of questions. I know that you're planning a workshop. Is the plan then during the workshop to present the adjustments for the right sizing to enrollment by business unit, so we can see how the staffing is rolling out across the different business units?
The ability to do that typically comes when we pull everything together, which happens more mid to late May. So if we're talking about our workshops in March, I think it would be more around, we could discuss what staffing assumptions are, but it wouldn't necessarily, we can look into that. I guess the budget unit piece is what I'm a little concerned about. I think I hear you asking, can we see the staffing by budget unit and its impact for the right sizing in March? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'd have to, I know we can get the identification of like what we're looking at for those class sizes. Keep in mind, those ratios that I mentioned, those are only classroom teachers only. So it doesn't include, those ratios are not used for the support services that we see for special education or for EL or for, student needs that there might be, ADSIS, other needs. So the point being that those are layered on top. And so that's where the use of our federal funds and how we can help use those to help offset some of this is what we're looking to do outside of the classroom adjustments. So essentially what you're going to see is those are going to be in the classroom adjustments, and it's just depending on how much level. So as I talk myself through it, it's really going to end up being in your elementary, middle school, and your high school core classrooms, that those adjustments are going to be reflected, whether it's in teachers or educational assistants or others that are supporting. It'll be in those 3 budget units is my point.
So, and forgive me, I just want to, we have an opportunity here to help shape what that information will look like when it comes to us in workshop. So theoretically, there could be understanding how the budget unit plays itself out. We could see, for example, elementary teacher FTEs being adjusted at X number. We could see elementary EAs being adjusted at Y number, right?
Yes, the work that is done through our HR, director of HR, and all of our principals and department leads during the month of March and April is to really fine tune exactly who's in what positions. So if you're talking overall counts, yes.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about like who's where, that won't be finalized in March yet.
Okay.
That's all I'm
and I
trying to
guess
say.
the final question and concern is, and I've kind of, I respect the guidance and the expertise, Dr. Battle, that you and your team bring. As our enrollment continues to decline, and we cut teachers and EAs, and we remain top heavy, I have concerns about that. I think that we need to, whether it's with this budget or with that, that review that you're doing in the fall to find efficiencies, maintaining administration and the upper level at the expense of teachers and EAs when enrollment is declining is something that we really need to take a good hard look at. Because right now, I personally, speaking for myself, would hope to see some kind of adjustment because, we've got great teachers, we have great principals, we have great leadership. And in terms of talking about equity, as far as our adjustments, we need to make sure that we're being mindful about that. So whatever, Therese, I know that, in years past, we have been able to see what the impact of these adjustments are on FTE, saying that, we're not going to be able to see that until April or May. I don't understand why that would be true for this year as opposed to years past.
Let me clarify. It's not that the FTE is not available. If you are asking for a list of names, that will not be available.
Oh, no.
Oh,
I'm not
yes.
looking for a list of names. No,
Okay.
no.
Yep.
Just the
Yep.
buckets.
Yep, got it.
Director Alt, thank you for your comments. And so, as you shared, that's one of the reasons why we're not bringing forward an increase in class size, because we do recognize last year that we had reductions in our teachers that were heavy. And so we'll look at our administration and define that for the board, what's in that category. Because it varies. As you said, it does include the school principals. And so thank you for your comments.
And I just wanted to put that out there so that, you know, the officers can work with you and, you know, what that document might look like for us in workshop, because I don't want to just see percentages. And that's my last question. Thank you.
Any additional questions or observations at this point? All right, seeing none, we will wrap up this
So
part.
Chair Miller, can I get clarification? So at the workshop, the board did ask to go to the fund balance at 6%. So this evening you've seen that impact. So just wanted to ensure that we're moving forward with that, and then we'll bring forward that board action.
Yeah, I have not seen any change or had any indication from what our previous conversation on direction was. I anticipate that when we have further clarity on the exacts of the anticipated reductions, we'll be able to discuss those in our workshops. I did share with you and Lisa Ryder the form that I wish to see those in our workshop. So I think that should probably settle the previous conversation we had. So okay.
Thank you.
We'll move on then to the next part of tonight's meeting, and that is to receive an update about District 191's efforts to implement COVID-19 related educational and public health guidance issued by the NDE and the MDH, respectively. Speaking will be Dr. Battle.
Chair Miller, directors of the board, if I may, I'd like to share some comments before my regular COVID-19 report. So this week, February 22nd through 26th is Minnesota School Board Recognition Week. And so in your role, yes, you serve as an essential voice for our community in their schools, and you provide that local oversight for our most important public service. And you ensure the community's values and needs are reflected in our work and in the schools. As school members, you selflessly devote your knowledge, your talents, and a significant amount of time to your roles as advocates for students and families and ambassadors to the communities we serve. Our students truly benefit daily from your hard work and dedication. And so on behalf of myself, staff, students, and the entire 191 community, thank you for your tireless service as members of the District 191 Board of Education. Thank you. And with that, I'll move on to our COVID-19 board report. This evening, presenting with me will be Bernadette Bean, our lead school nurse, and then Lisa Ryder will join us at the end of our slide presentation. So tonight, we're going to share information related to health and safety, academics, activities, and operations. And first, we will begin with the confirmed cases from Dakota and Scott County. This represents a 2-week period from January 31st through February 13th. Dakota County released today is at 25.2, which is a decrease from 29.46 from the last 2 weeks. And Scott County is 27.13, which is an increase from 25.60. Per the previous recommended policy options in the Minnesota Safe Learning Plan, secondary would be in the hybrid learning model. However, as you know, Governor Walz made an announcement on Wednesday, February 17th, that prompted an update to Minnesota Safe Learning Plan. That based on CDC guidance, if a school is currently in an in-person or hybrid model, the county level data does not impact the need to transition to a more restrictive model. Instead, schools should rely on school-level COVID-19 transmission data and staff capacities when making the decision to transfer between learning models. Also, starting on February 22nd, every middle and high school across the state had the option to choose to operate a hybrid or an in-person learning model if they were able to implement health and safety measures. Also, Governor Walz announced that starting on February 22nd, a rolling start or staggered start, which we implemented in September, is no longer required for any schools, elementary, middle, or high school, to safely transition to an in-person or hybrid learning model. So schools may choose to remove the rolling start portion of their plan and implement a hybrid or in-person learning model for all grades at the same time. In the upcoming slide presentation, I will share a few other changes, but at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Bernie Bean, who can share analysis of the county data and share an update on our 191 data and any updates on mitigation strategies. Bernie?
Thank you, Dr. Battle, and good evening, Board of Directors. So like Dr. Battle said, I'm going to give you a little bit more information on our local counties data and a little bit on what we are seeing in our district at this time. The positivity rate for Scott County has increased just a little bit from 4.1 to 4.6, and Dakota County has actually decreased from 4.1 to 3.9. A couple specific things for Dakota County. Their average 7-day rate of positive reports has increased from 74 last week to 78. So they're staying pretty stable. And one of the really exciting pieces of data from Dakota County is that in the last 10 days, they have had no positive cases in our long-term care facilities in Dakota County. And they really feel that that's a testimony to the vaccination that has happened, because that was the first targeted group. And so that's really exciting news for us. Internally, since we went to in-person for elementary school, so February 1st to today, we have had 0 case investigations for positive staff members, and we have had 1 positive non-staff member case investigation. We have to remember that we are in person now, and when I look back at our data, and the health offices are keeping lots of numbers for us on what our trends are, what our rates are, what our case investigations are. The first case tracing that we did on the elementary level in the fall, that seems like a long time ago, was actually September 20th. At that time, Scott County's 14-day rate was 20.66, and Dakota County was 22.11. Now, I am not a statistician, and this is not research. This is my interpretation of what these numbers are telling us. In September, we were hybrid, had less children. Now we are in person, more children. Our numbers are higher as far as our county data than they were in September, but our positive cases within our building are less. So to me, that is saying what we're doing is working. Our priority on health and safety is impacting the positive disease and transmission in our community. And that's kudos to the work from families to partner with us, the work from our staff, the work from our students, that we are really succeeding in keeping a safe environment. Now, we still are in a pandemic, and we will still see COVID. But what we're doing is working well. Our mitigation strategies of face shields, we just got our new shipment last week. And what I'm hearing from staff, I'm still wearing my old one. what I'm hearing from staff is the big difference is they've allowed some air holes on the foam, and that has helped with the fogging. It has helped with a little air exchange. So they have been a great addition to our face shields. As far as saliva screening, our drool teams are set and ready to go for them to offer their first screening in the middle schools on Monday. They're trained and set to provide that optional service to our staff members. Vaccines, lots have been happening with the vaccine world. As you know, or maybe don't know, last week with the storms in the south, that caused no vaccine to come to our local counties. And so that put a little wrench in the rollout. But this week, our counties have been working full speed ahead, and they are vaccinating a lot. And actually, if I look at when we offered the first vaccines to our health services in our school district, and health in school is a pretty broad definition. It's our health offices, it's our licensed health professionals, our PTs, our OTs, our speech, it's our drill teams, it is our EAs and our staff that work with children and do personal care type services. This week and next week, those staff members should be completing their 2-dose COVID series if they participated in that. So we are moving ahead. Alina has been an amazing partner for us to continue to offer that option for staff members. Johnson & Johnson just applied for an emergency use authorization for their 1-dose vaccine. And the hope is that tomorrow they will get that stamp of approval and they will be able to start rolling that vaccine out also. And that is my report. Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on to academics. So our elementary students and staff have finished their transition back to in-person learning as grades 3 through 5 were welcome back to school this month. So pre-flight checklists have been completed for several weeks as we waited for our COVID cases to fall. And on Monday, February 22nd, middle and high school teams began their transition days to convert our sites back to hybrid learning, which will begin on Monday, March 1st. So for our hybrid students in grades 6 to 12, they will begin school starting with A-Day students on Monday, March 1st, and B-Day students on Thursday, March 4th. And we are continuing providing our virtual academy. So we still have our distance learning students also continuing. So hybrid learning for Burnsville Alternative High School looks a little different, and thanks to their smaller size, students in hybrid will be able to attend in person 4 days per week starting March 1st. Moving on to activities. The advisory team continues to meet weekly to monitor COVID cases and set our dials for activities and athletics. As individual tracing occurs, we have had some need to adjust dials on an activity by activity basis. But thus far, COVID permits us to continue setting dials that permit both student participation and spectators. Food and nutrition services. With more students returning to in-person and hybrid learning, we need nutrition services staff to serve students at sites. Our largest use of meal pickup is at Nicollet and at Eagle Ridge. We surveyed families at pickup at Sioux Trail this Wednesday, and 32 vehicles were at Sioux Trail on Wednesday. And so our nutrition services director, Julie Cronenbetter, spoke to every driver to see if they would be willing and had the ability to go to Nicollet or Eagle Ridge to pick up their meals. There were only 7 who said no. One family had homeschool children. One was in hybrid. One person had children in both in-person and hybrid. 2 were in virtual academy, 2 children in virtual academy for 1 family, and 2 were in person at Ron. And so with the low numbers at Sioux Trail and the increase of the needs at the sites for in-person and hybrid, it takes a considerable amount of resources and effort to order and accept those deliveries and prepare the meals. And so we are going to survey our families again, but we are thinking that next Wednesday will be the last date for pickup at Sioux Trail. We are going to communicate if we make that change to families and ask our social workers and cultural liaisons to work with families that need assistance to Nicollet and Eagle Ridge. We've seen a significant drop as the numbers for the 32 for Sioux Trail. If you remember early in the pandemic, we had significant across our district. There are many resources in the community that families are accessing to. And so for our VA families, they get a 5-meal packet to last for 5 days. So I wanted to emphasize that. So we're going to reach out to our families and collect more data. But at this point, it looks like the last pickup, correct me if I'm wrong, Lisa, would be the next Wednesday,
March 3rd. Yeah.
March 3rd, because it's dwindling and we need more support at the in-person. Oh, excuse me. Aaron, we can move to the slide presentation, please. Okay, thank you for that, Aaron. So as I mentioned earlier, Governor Walz made a significant announcement that districts really had the option to go to in-person. And so, as you know, we had announced we were going to hybrid for our middle and high school students. And so we've had a few questions about why we cannot just go to in-person. So the next slide, I want to show you the update straight from the Minnesota learning plan. We still have to adhere to social distancing. And so just mentioning again about that February 17th announcement. Next slide, Aaron, please. The additional health and safety, we're continuing that community, our saliva testing. So as part of the additional mitigation strategies, the governor and Minnesota Department of Health and Minnesota Department of Education are asking staff to access the community saliva testing on the off weeks of our distant testing. This is the part about the physical distancing guidelines. We have to maintain 6 feet of physical distance from one another during the school day whenever feasible. When 6 feet of distancing cannot be met, a minimum of 3 feet of physical distance between students must be maintained. So that's part of the work of the teams at the middle and high school. Next slide, Aaron, please. Also, as part of going back to in-person, we are required to have daily documentation of lunchroom seating to support the contact tracing in the event of an exposure. Also, and Bernie may need to come in if we have questions about this piece. Previously, we used the county data as the starting point, but they want us to go more to local COVID-19 data. And so this is this addresses that local data. So it's the number of students and school staff who are absent or who are sent home with influenza or COVID-19 like illnesses reaches approximately 5% of the total number of students and staff in a school in just 1 week. We were mandated to work with our regional support team if we were changing models. Now we just simply need to, we reach out to them if we reach that threshold. Schools are strongly encouraged to discuss whether transition to a more restrictive learning model is necessary. Next slide. The governor, Minnesota Department of Health, and Minnesota Department of Education have asked us to strongly recommend to students and families to receive a COVID-19 test every 2 weeks at one of those community sites. And you can find locations for free COVID-19 testing on the Minnesota Department of Health website. And we will also be sharing this information out to our families. Any school that's implementing in-person or hybrid learning must offer the distance learning option. And so we are continuing with that. We are getting some questions if that will continue in the fall. So as you know, we're somewhat surprised by the 3 learning models that were announced for this fall. So just stay tuned. We really don't know. We're trying to get through this spring and the end of the year, and then launch our summer programming. With the next slide, Lisa's going to cover some operational issues in addition to the food service that I shared earlier.
Thank you, Dr. Battle. The state has now provided the face shields that we were awaiting, and so we're pleased to see that those are now received and available to our sites. Additionally, as our secondary bus routes have been completed and that communication was sent out on postcards this week, as well as now that information is loaded into Parent View as well, so that everyone can see that information within their Parent View account. And if they aren't accessing it in that manner, then those postcards should also be in their mail. So we're pleased about the timing of all of this being available to our families so that they're prepared for next week as to which bus their students will be riding. That concludes my conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. That concludes the COVID-19 report. A lot of big changes, a lot of updated information connected to Governor Walz's announcement. Thank you, Chair and Directors.
Thank you. Do we have any desire for comments or questions? Director Alt?
So a question, of course, I always have concerns about meals for our families. So the families that were surveyed at Sioux Trail, there were 32 of them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's dropped significantly, yeah, 32.
So as part of Julie Cronenbetter's survey of the families, was there an option to choose between going to Nicollet versus having meals delivered to their home? Did we get a response for both of those?
Yes, if I may. So those 32 that were present, Director Cronenbetter inquired of those as to whether they could attend Nicollet or Metcalf, or I'm sorry, Nicollet or Eagle Ridge. And if that wasn't possible, then there were 7 basically that indicated that would be problematic. And so she further inquired as to what was the reasons for those. And so those are items that we believe we can address with a small number of families that would be an issue for.
So delivery to their homes is really what we're looking at for those 7 families.
Of the 7, some of them are actually in person, and some were hybrid, and so it wouldn't be a constant, and some were actually not part of our schools, and so that's where they would then possibly be looking for something of a delivery. Yes.
Got it. So it was a mixed group.
Yes, it was.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions? Director Hume?
Just had a question to piggyback onto Director Alt's question about the meal deliveries. So 32 is the number at Sioux Trail. What does the typical number of meals picked up at Eagle Ridge and Nicollet? Maybe I missed that, but I'm curious. as a comparison?
Yeah, those I think are running more around the 150 mark.
Okay, that's a pretty big difference, all right.
Right.
Okay, thanks. And then my comment is, I know it's only been a couple of weeks, but I think it's very encouraging that in our elementaries, by following all of the guidelines and protocols, that, knock on wood, things are good so far. So thank you to all of you on the call, and thank you to all of our teachers and our staff in the buildings for the tremendous work that is going in to keep all of our students and staff safe while they are in the building 5 days a week. And I sincerely hope that that translates when my kids and many others return to hybrid next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, I thank Dr. Battle for the report. We will now move to the committee board appointment and school assignments report section of our evening. We'll start with any kind of committee or board appointment roles. If you are assigned to a committee and have had a meeting since this assignment in January, now would be an opportunity to give an overview, typically reserved whoever's chairing the committee, but anybody would like to go first?
I'll go first.
All right.
Okay. Some of the proposals for bills I will be highlighting from the AMSD meeting. We're also
We're having a little bit of an internet delay with you, Director Connor.
members would, no? Am I frozen? Okay. Well, AMSD.
We hear you now.
Oh, you couldn't hear me before?
We couldn't before, but we hear you now.
Oh, okay. Okay, I was just wondering if the new members knew what the AMSD stood for, since I had to learn that myself.
Right ahead, you can
Okay.
lead in on it.
The first year teachers, this is one of the first proposals for the MSAD meeting. First year teacher mentor program to help retain teachers in accordance with the Teachers of Color initiative. Also, they propose a delay in implementation of academic standards for 1 year due to COVID. Then then the teachers could focus on the students' needs, such as not only their academic needs, but their emotional and social needs also. This would tie in with the summer program to hopefully get students up to par. Students that have a high absentee and low performance in school is what they're targeting. And they wanted Governor Walz to initiate to pass this bill immediately. I haven't heard since last week if he has or not, but I'm sure most likely he will. I shouldn't speak for the governor, but safe schools revenue. Current safe school levy is to include juvenile justice issues for traumatic students, students with special needs, hardships from the pandemic, and racial equity. This also includes a Plus Digital program, which will include screen time for parents with preschool or kindergarten children. They can look that way, they will be able to look in at their students at any given time of the day, and that's only proposed for preschool and kindergarten at this time. A few more issues. Proposals, I mean. Okay, they propose that paraprofessionals who work with students with disabilities be given paid time or time during the day to review student IEPs, and also annual pay, orientation, or professional development pay. Representative Joachim indicated that this was her intent and that funding would be provided to cover the costs associated with this requirement. They said the bill was going to be referred to the House Education Finance Committee. Also, they would like to propose requirements for schools to have a seizure action plan for students with seizure disorders and prescribed seizure medications. This bill was laid over to possible inclusion with the omnibus education bill. Representative Yoakum also proposed that they would have extended time revenue to all students at residential treatment facilities, providing mental health and juvenile justice services also. The testimony was in support of this bill, and that it would provide, and this person, Sandy Walandowski, she provided testimony to this bill with examples of why the funding was necessary, and testified to the critical importance of addressing this trauma and racial equity and mental health needs of our students. This bill was also laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. Hopefully you've received notice of the email about the driving equity and education.
Once again, I think you froze up there a bit.
Group to discuss the materials and generate ideas and solutions. And then it went on to tell all the dates for every month and the time, and the cost is $50. There will be a digital proposal for digital well-being in regard to social media, so cyberbullying, and responsible use of technology. The proposed legislation would provide a grant to a program called Live More, Screen Less, which would create an online resource hub for parents, organizations, teachers, and provide training modules for this digital well-being. And they're hoping to make this a statewide venture. No action.
Director Connor, we're having a hard time. You kind of breaking up again.
Oh, well, that was the end of my report. I'm sorry, I'm not sure why.
No, we got the majority of it. Thank you for your diligence and attending the meeting.
Sure.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Who would like to go next on any committee or board appointment roles?
I'll go. Policy Review Committee. We met this past Monday, the 22nd at 5:30, and reviewed 2 policies that will be coming forward, as well as a regulation that will come forward at our first meeting in March as an informational report. And the committee meets next on Monday, March 15th at 5:30. This concludes my report.
All right, very good. I believe the legislative committee will be as a marker spot later in the meeting, so we'll move past that. And then the negotiations committee, is there anything to report on that?
Nothing to report at this time.
Okay, any other board appointments to bring to the table? Well, school assignments, I know it's a little early and all that. Anybody made any reach outs or started those conversations? That's quite all right if you haven't. It's understandable. Okay, well, that'll end the committee board appointments and school assignments section, and also ends the informational section of our meeting tonight. We will now move to the business meeting component of our school board meeting tonight, beginning with the consent agenda. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. In the event a board member wishes to discuss an item, that item will be moved for separate consideration. I'll ask at this time if there's any item on the consent agenda that a board member wishes to remove for separate consideration. Seeing none, I will now ask for a motion for the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Director Connor and a second.
Second.
Seconded by Director Chester. Ms. Kenny, will you please call the roll?
Chester,
Aye.
Connor,
Aye.
Hume,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Said,
Aye.
Werb,
Aye.
Alt.
Aye.
The motion in front of us to approve tonight's consent agenda passes unanimously. Thank you. Now we will move to new business, beginning with our first item, a recommendation to accept resolution of concurrency for the Indian Education Goals Plan, Program Strategies and Activities. Speaking on this recommendation, Amina Afdal, Director of Curriculum, Instruction and Assessment. Amina, welcome back.
Chair Miller, Superintendent, members of the board, I am presenting to you just as a follow-up to the fantastic presentation from Rebecca about the activities and the organization of the American Indian Program and Parent Advisory Committee. The advisory committee did meet on February 10th and had some very spirited discussions, and very pleased to share with you their resolution of concurrency, which did pass unanimously. It's my recommendation that the school board approve and accept that resolution.
Excellent, thank you. I'll read the, tonight's recommendation, may I have a motion on tonight's recommendation that pursuant to Minnesota State Statute Section 124D.78 Subdivision 2, it is recommended that ISD 191 School Board accept the American Indian Parent Advisory Group vote of concurrence, attesting that the school district are compliant with Minnesota statutes and meeting the needs of American Indian children. I'm looking for a motion for the recommendation in front of us.
So moved.
Moved by Director Chester. Second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Alt. Ms. Kenny, will you please call, or excuse me, first I will open it up for discussion if there is any. Very well. Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, will you please call the roll?
Connor,
Aye.
Hume,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Said,
Aye.
Werb,
Aye.
Alt,
Aye.
Chester.
Aye.
Very well. The recommendation in front of us passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will move to the next recommendation in our new business section to approve the 2021 legislative platform. Speaking on this recommendation, Leslie Chester, Vice Chair of this board, and Aaron Tinkelberg, Director of Communications. Dr.
Yes.
Chester.
Yes, thank you, Chair Miller. On behalf of the Legislative Committee, we are bringing forward our legislative platform recommendation for the board to approve tonight. When the committee met, we were taking in consideration what the MSBA and AMSD has put forward in terms of their legislative platform agendas, and then taking that to what it means and fits for our district and what's important to us in terms of what we need for financially supporting our district, as well as for increasing our diversity amongst our teachers, as well as we're looking at the sale of some of our buildings and needing to have exceptions. So I will have Aaron bring forward on screen what we are recommending the board approve tonight. And Aaron, feel free to chime in too. And so we're proposing as part of our platform 4 targeted areas. One is we're asking for an increase of basic education funding by 2% per year. So 2 and 2, even though, as we were discussing earlier, that we are being very conservative as we're doing our budgeting, that we were anticipating 0, but we are going to be advocating for 2 and 2. We also want to reduce the cross subsidy for special education and English learning, because that does impact our general fund. And then also 3, provide targeted funding to increase diversity amongst our teachers. And then again, as I had mentioned, with looking at future sale of some of our properties that we have closed, is provide a legislative exemption for our property sale. So on behalf of the legislative committee, we are bringing forward and having a recommendation that the board approve our legislative platform.
Excellent. I would ask for a motion to approve the recommendation in front of us.
So moved.
Moved by Director Hume and seconded by Director Connor. I'll open it up for discussion and comments. Director Alt.
Well, first, I'd like to thank the Legislative Committee and Aaron and your team for pulling this together. It's a lovely, it looks great. I think it'll sit well in the hands of our community and our legislators. I do have a motion to amend, and just wanted to, I prepared a statement just to help frame my motion and to provide some context for our work. Having looked back through our meeting materials in the new year, and this is specifically relating to item 4, the legislative exemption. In the new year, there has been no workshop or formal discussion in a regular board meeting to define our parameters for the legislative exemption. The last discussion as a full board happened in November 2020. So basically within item number 4, I interpret 2 separate conversations that need to take place. One is, the main thrust of the fact that this is the legislative platform. And the question is, do we as a board support the general tenets of what's being proposed? The second conversation, which I would suggest would be a separate conversation from the platform, is that the board needs to create, we've talked before about how the board must create a detailed position to present to legislators, including the intended use of these funds. This need for a discussion requires a deep dive to reach consensus, either via staff providing reporting or via detailed recommendation from the legislative committee based on their due diligence. At this point, I would just pose a, open-ended question for fellow board members to consider. Do other board members believe they understand our options in terms of using the proceeds from the sale of our properties? and what that means in terms of this exemption. Do fellow board members outside of the legislative committee, collectively and individually, understand the pros and cons of these options and why a decision to specify, quote, staff and programming, end quote, is our best option? So to get to the motion to amend, I move to amend item number 4, the legislative exemption, to read, quote, District 191 is planning to sell one or more properties and is seeking a legislative exemption that would allow proceeds of the sale to be transferred to the district's general fund, end quote. And then delete, quote, ensuring those funds are used to directly impact student learning through programming and staffing, end quote. We all know that this board has agreed to have proceeds go to the general fund. As a full board, however, we have not yet discussed or decided how we wish to use the proceeds. Now, I'm not suggesting that upon collective review, we may decide that this current verbiage best captures the preferred option. I am simply suggesting that we owe ourselves and our community further vetting to reach an informed decision by this body as a whole. To provide further context of our work per existing policy, policy 213, school board committees, the general statement of policy is looking at section 2, item D. The committee or subcommittee is advisory in nature and has only authority as specified by the school board. E goes on and to continue, the school board will receive reports or recommendations from a committee or subcommittee for consideration. The school board, however, retains the right and has the duty to make all final decisions related to such reports or recommendations. And while one might argue that this represents the platform that's being proposed tonight represents the committee's recommendation, the main recommendation is really regarding the legislative platform, while the proposed use of proceeds is indirect or implied. As a district, it is our responsibility to be transparent with our community. Nothing could be more transparent than a workshop to reach consensus on the terms of the legislative exemption. This information would be received, as I mentioned before, either as a staff report or as an in-depth recommendation by the legislative committee. Should there be a second to my motion to amend, this board would have the opportunity to discuss whether the full membership, legislative committee and non, enjoy the same level of knowledge and understanding of our options for using proceeds. For example, here we have the suggestion to use it for staff and programming. There are other options to commit and use immediately to update our existing buildings. Also, to commit for future use and add on to a middle school when enrollment reaches sufficient levels. There may be others. If there is a second to this motion, we would also have the opportunity to determine the means by which we would receive information on the legislative exemption. Again, workshop with staff reports or workshop hosted by the legislative committee, with the committee providing recommendations and evidence to support that recommendation. In the end, my goal here is simply to make sure that this board moves forward together with knowledge, with transparency among ourselves and within our community. As it stands now, based on the timeline above, I worry that only the legislative committee members might be able to explain this decision to our community, based, of course, on their due diligence and the homework that I know they have completed, as described by Director Chester. As fellow board members, we all need to be able to support and communicate the value and benefits of this platform in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Alt. Director Alt has presented a motion for amendment of the recommendation in front of us. I would ask if there is a second for Director Alt's motion.
A second.
Sorry, was that Director Werb?
Yes.
Seconded by Director Werb. Apologize, somebody help me out. Do we need to have a roll vote on that then, on the actual amendment? Okay.
Yes.
So then well, first of all, I would open it up for discussion on the amendment to the recommendation of the legislative platform. So to be clear, we're simply at this point discussing the amendment. And that is to strike the last, after the comma in the sentence. Director Connor.
Are you only talking about the number 4 portion of the, just number 4?
At this point, we are simply discussing whether we would amend what is ultimately going to be voted on to strike that last part beginning with ensuring those funds. Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, certainly. Any further conversation? I will just speak to it in a moment. I think I'm fine with this amendment. I think it is healthy to, in general practice, to put things out that are that don't limit us in our abilities. So, in general, I think I agree with Director Alt's careful consideration of the matter. Any further commentary? Hearing none at this point, I would ask Ms. Kenny to bring forth the roll. This will simply be for the amendment to the proposed recommendation in front of us. Ms. Kenny.
Hume.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye.
Said.
Aye.
Werb.
Aye.
Alt.
Aye.
Chester.
Aye.
Connor.
Aye.
The proposed amendment passes unanimously. So we're back to general conversation about the legislative platform now in its amended form. Any
Do you want me to
further
take the roll call?
No, we're commentary at this point. Any further commentary or questions about the? Thank you, Ms. Kenny. Any further commentary or questions on the recommendation for the legislative platform? I will like to say, echoing Ms. Alt's earlier comments, I am impressed by the look and feel, the time I know that went into that. Thank you very much. I'd also like to just point out that the purpose of the legislative committee has multiple purposes. This is one of them, and so I appreciate the time and energy getting this taken care of and out the door. This is, of course, 4 items. Its intent is to provide speaking points, elevator pitches, if you would, if in the classic terminology. In no way is this, of course, representative of the entirety of our interests or focus of this district, and certainly doesn't mean that we're limiting ourselves to this, nor we're limiting to ourselves, nor are we excluding anything that might pop up a month or 2 from now that we're not aware of currently. So just to be clear for everybody, this simply gives us some direction and focus on the key things that are in front of us. It's purposely limited to 3 or 4 items in its design in that interest. So, all right, having discussed it at this point, I will take the roll call to, we will be voting on the recommendation to accept the legislative platform as amended by the previous agreed upon amendment. Ms. Kenny, will you call the roll, please?
Miller.
Aye.
Said.
Aye.
Werb.
Aye.
Alt.
Aye.
Chester.
Aye.
Connor.
Aye.
Hume.
Aye.
The recommendation in front of us passes unanimously. Thank you. Nothing like stretching my Robert's Rules legs a little bit. Thank you. All right. The next item we have is to next recommendation in front of us is to elect to extend the student transportation contract with Schmitty and Sons, our busing company. Presenting the recommendation tonight, Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair Miller. As we take a look at our transportation contracts for next year, we have the opportunity to extend our existing transportation contract. And I'd like to take a moment just to kind of give a little bit of history on where, how long we've been with Schmitty and Sons and et cetera. So it was March of 2018 when the board awarded the transportation contract for the fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 20 school years to Schmitty and Sons buses in Burnsville LLC. And at that time, the contract was written such that there was 2 additional years as options. So as part of the contract, it requires that we at least notify at least 90 days prior to the end of the school year the purpose of our renewal or non-renewal for the coming year. And we have that option then for that 3rd and that 4th year. We would be moving into our 4th year. We are currently in our 3rd year. And we've been very pleased with the service that has been provided by Schmitty and Sons. So according to the contract, it also identifies already the amount that the rates would increase should we exercise the option and elect to extend the student transportation contract for that 4th year. So based on the consumer price index and the fact that that is calculating higher for the Minneapolis area at the end of the year, the fact is that we would be working with a 1.3% increase, which is the lower amount that is in the contract as written originally. So this recommendation is that the Board of Education approves the election to extend the student transportation contract with Schmitty and Sons and authorizes the notification of renewal with a rate increase of 1.3% for the 2021-2022 school year. With this, we would next provide a letter of notification to Schmitty and Sons of our intent to renew, should this be approved by the board.
May I have a motion, please, for the recommendation in front of us?
So moved.
Moved by Director Chester, and may I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Connor. I will open it up for discussion and comments on the recommendation in front of us. Director Alt.
I just want to echo Lisa's comments that, we've had really positive feedback on Schmitty and Sons, and in contrast to, experiences with the previous provider, and they've really been partners and here in our community. So appreciate having them.
Thank you. Would any other board members wish to comment or ask questions? Very well. Seeing none, Ms. Kenny, I would ask you to please call the roll.
Said.
Aye.
Werb.
Aye.
Alt.
Aye.
Chester.
Aye.
Connor.
Aye.
Hume.
Aye.
Miller.
Aye. And with that, the recommendation in front of us passes unanimously. We'll now move to next item on our agenda, award contract for classroom audio system purchase. Again, Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Actually, I'm going to ask also that Director of Technology, Rachel Gorton, have an opportunity to just describe for you a little bit more of the details around this. So I'll just pause and should there be any need, I'll come back. But Rachel, why don't you go ahead and describe this?
Thanks, Lisa. Good evening, Chair Miller, Board of Directors, and Superintendent Battle. Tonight I'm here with a recommendation to award a contract for classroom technology audio system installment purchase from Lightspeed. And just some background on this, last spring, we were ready to start moving forward with some of our upgrades to our classroom technology. And these upgrades are part of the technology levy funds. we were ready to start moving. In fact, some of our last slide decks and information was in February of last year. And then we know what happened in March. And so like many of the things that Lisa was describing earlier, there were some things that were put on hold as we reacted and responded to the COVID pandemic. And the classroom technology upgrades were one of those items. So we are revisiting those now. We're coming back to those this spring. And the one tonight is for installed audio systems. We currently have a similar models that we are asking for your approval tonight in some of our classrooms and some of our buildings, but is very scattered across. So we have a couple of our elementary schools and our new high school additions that were part of Vision 191. We did put in audio systems, installed audio systems, and now we're looking to go back and ensure that all of our classrooms have this technology. This is research-based. It's excellent. We definitely right now, when we're wearing masks and shields, we're really cognizant of the inability to hear clearly and how important it is that our students and our staff are able to hear without straining and speak without straining for the time that they're in the classroom. So we are choosing to go with Lightspeed. Lightspeed is the vendor that we have standardized on. It does work with our assistive technology systems across in our buildings. And in order to maintain kind of that ability to work with warranties and quick responses for issues that come in, we'd like to stay with the Lightspeed model and brand. Our installation for the project will be through a third party that we have used before and have had very good successful relationship with, and would like to stay with that company. And funding for the purchase is going to be using FY20 technology levy carryover. So again, that was earmarked for last spring for these purposes, and now we'll be using that as we move forward. And then the remainder is going to be out of the FY21, this current technology levy year, our unspent that we have available to us. I did note in the recommendation that we did put in the option for gear or ESSER, and that really is to just address the fact that at this point we have not seen our Gear 2 or our ESSER 2 allocations, and so to provide the most flexibility to maximize our resources as we move forward. The Lightspeed audio systems will be put into elementary, middle school, and high school. At this point, we will not be addressing BAWs, but we will be looking at that in a next phase for future options. We also will be opening up some portable systems that we have available to be able to move around to other systems. They're currently in rooms, and they will be getting installed systems. And so we'll have those available for some of our rooms as well. So with that, it is recommended that the contract be approved with Lightspeed for a total of $397,744.
Thank you. May I have a motion for the recommendation put forward before us?
So moved.
And may I have a second? Moved by Director Ault. May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Director Word. Any conversation or questions on the recommendation in front of us?
Just one, Rachel. Can you help us understand how BAWs was not included in this round of updates?
Yeah, so the main reason for BAWs not being included in this round is for if there's potential movement for programming, we don't want to put anything into classrooms that is permanent, that can't be moved. But we will be freeing up our portable systems so that we can put in some good systems into those classrooms that have more portability.
Fair point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Very well, seeing none, Ms. Kenny, will you please call the roll?
Werb,
Aye.
Alt,
Aye.
Chester,
Aye.
Connor,
Aye.
Hume,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Said.
Aye.
Very well. The recommendation to award contract for classroom audio system purchase passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Excellent. And now we will come to the final item of this evening's new business section with a recommendation to approve broker recommendation. And this with her hat trick tonight, Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services. Lisa, you're up again.
Thank you, Chair Miller. So we have had many conversations around facilities, and those conversations have led us to a request for proposals for broker services that was conducted with the assistance of Ellers. Staff at Ellers, along with ourselves, worked to prepare the RFP, send that RFP out. There was on January 13th that was sent out to 10 different brokerage firms. 7 responded. Of those 7, 6 of them met the requirements of our RFP and were determined to be eligible for interviews should we choose. So on February 2nd and 3rd, there was a team of us that met with each of those 6 and conducted conversations with them. It was inclusive of Ellers staff, Chair Miller, Vice Chair Chester, and Dr. Battle, and other staff here, myself and Dave Lake. So with those in attendance for those interviews, then based on those interviews, 3 of the firms were identified as being a good fit for us. They had similar listings in the area, and with their fee information, Transwestern is one of the 3 finalists with the lowest amount of brokerage fee at 4% for a gross sales price, but should there be a co-broker, then that amount would be 7%. The contract that you have included in your packet is a 1-year agreement that may be canceled by either party within 30 days written notice. Transwestern has assigned 4 of their members to be on our listing team. They are responsible, according to the agreement, to pay for all advertisement for the sale of the property and provide bi-weekly updates as well as monthly reports on the interest, leads, and status of those. They would advise the district on proposed purchase terms should those come forward, and coordination of the buyer's due diligence and investigation of that property until the transaction is complete. This is really around the one property of River Ridge. Any future property to be sold by the district, we may choose to utilize this particular company at their discretion if they are pleased, if at our discretion, excuse me, if we're pleased with the services that are performed. So with that, the recommendation before you is that the Board of Education approves Transwestern as a broker for the listing of the River Ridge Education Center.
I would ask for a motion on the recommendation in front of us.
So moved.
Moved by Director Hume, and a second on the motion in front of us.
Second.
Seconded by Director Chester. I'll open it up for questions and discussion. Any questions or comments on the selection of the broker? Well, seeing none, I do want to make a couple of comments, and Director Chester, you can jump in if you wish. This was I know this at this point appears to be, a last item on our agenda this evening. We're kind of flying past it, but it was an exhaustive process that went into this. We spent a rather hastily combined together a number of evenings in calls, virtual calls with all the brokerage firms that made it to the round of interviews. And frankly, I would say my hat's off to everyone that interviewed for the process. Every one of them, it was a very close race. It was a horse race that would have gone to the photo finish. Our determining factors came down to just some of the way we felt, it kind of the mix and the feel, and frankly, the numbers were pretty closely aligned on all of them. With all of them, there was a little bit of savings here and there. These kind of conversations, none of us are experts in real estate, large scale commercial real estate sales, but we're learning as we go. But you know, you're looking at firms that are small, medium, and large. You worry with the really large ones, nationally large ones, whether you're going to be getting as much attention as you would maybe with those different sized ones. We had multiple conversations around all of that. If you do have questions, I would encourage you to, you know, if they pop up later or whatever, to direct them to Dr. Battle. But I do want to assure you that we've spent quite a lot of time, and we were very happy with the assistance we received in our guidance through this process. So just I'd like you all to know that at least. So, all right. So that with that, Ms. Kenny, I'll ask you to call the roll, please.
Alt,
Aye.
Chester,
Aye.
Connor,
Aye.
Hume,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Said,
Aye.
Werb.
Aye.
And the recommendation to approve the broker passes unanimously. Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our regularly scheduled board meeting this evening. I'm going to call us into an adjournment. We will be adjourning to a Student Performance and Achievement Committee of the Whole meeting. The time is currently at 8:46. I'm going to suggest that we take a little break here before we go to the next part of our evening. So let's return back here at the top of the hour at 9 o'clock, if that would work.